Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, we will be continuing on our theme on Hindu temples and architecture, and here, as we have already covered some of the aspects of the early architecture building in the Hindu context, we have seen that how the rock cut structures as well as the structures which are made from individual blocks of stone or from brick, they came into being, and how they have already started to address the complexity of the ritualistic practices as well as the philosophy in Hinduism. Now, there are some of the other examples that we have here and today we'll be getting into the rock cut structures as well as the temples and the architecture building patronized by the Pallava kings in the state of Tamil Nadu today in southern India. So, what we have there, that there are particular two sites that we will be talking about today, that is Mamallapuram and Kanchipuram. So, in Mamallapuram being a port city which is situated by the Bay of Bengal, which is around 40 kilometers from the city of Chennai today, and there we see there are a number of rock cut structures. So, that starting with a temple on the top of the hill to there are those 5 very celebrated Ratha structures or the chariot like structures, and then there is also a shore temple. So, it is believed that there were more shore such temples like the shore temple which were swept away in the ocean. So, we see that this is a particular site which is of high interest to all of us, how this building activity that had flourished there between 7th and 8th centuries, and those were patronized by the Pallavas. Now, the other thing that we find there is that how this particular site, it was not really the capital city of the Pallavas, but this site was perhaps used as a place for different kind of experimentation. So, this is basically, it's a space for different kind of artistic experimentations that we can imagine that had taken place in the 7th and 8th centuries. So, the kind of experimentation we still talk about today in the artist studios and in the workshops. So, Mamallapuram should also be related to that kind of experiments if we think about it some 1200 or 1300 years back. Now, what happened in Mamallapuram? So, in Mamallapuram we see that there have been those rock structures, sandstone structures, and then this ones, the sculptors and the architects, they have carved this magnificent structures and they have made the temple like forms as well as reliefs and so on. And here we have on screen the 5 Ratha temples, and these Ratha temples being very important, as we know that they are the ones, they sort of like show some of the early developments in southern Indian art and early developments of southern Indian temple structures, the Hindu temple structures. Now, what are some of the what are some of the traits or the features that we see there? So, I will start with this structure here, and which look very similar to the kind of the temple structures that we see today, and in which we find that this particular this temple, the main temple is called Vimana, and in this Vimana what we have here is that there is also this entrance porch which we have already addressed, that how there needs to be an entrance porch for the devotees to approach the temple, and on the top of the temple we have this very elaborately made the shikhara. So, here what we have that there is a pyramidal roof. So, if we think about the roofs we have seen in in Bhubaneswar chamber and so on, there is this the roof we see that is slightly different from this pyramidal roof that we have here. And here again we have the vertical divisions, but the vertical divisions this parallel panels that we have here, they are much more distinctive than the ones that we have seen in the northern Indian temples or the central Indian ones. And here on the top of the vertical, in this horizontal registers that we have here, we see that there are those individual units which look like a barrel roofed temple form. So all those forms, and then here we have this this particular forms here as well. So the replication of this temple like form or the shikhara or the superstructure on the top of the superstructure, this idea of multiplication and replications that already we have studied so far is also here in this temple as well. And apart from this, what we also see in the body of this temple there are those vertical projections which sort of like come out of the main structure of the temple, and then there are elaborate carvings. So the carvings can have, usually in these vertical projections we have that individual figures who are carved, individual or figures in groups, and most of these carvings, they shows the deities. They are either part of a narrative or they are as granting boon or reassuring the devotees. So this kind of structures are there, and then these sculptures are sort of like carved out of these structures here. Now on the top of this, here we do not really see an amalaka stone, but this is this copula like structure that we find, which is also called as stupika. And stupika is something that we can understand that this also resembles the Buddhist stupas. So it's not necessary that we have to think that whether it came from the Buddhist practices or not, but one can imagine that this kind of this stup, or like this particular piled like form is not only just there in the Buddhist practice, but it had already been there, as we have seen very briefly in our discussion on the burial practices in southern India, where we see that there are those menhir like forms, or the stone structures which are erected vertically for marking a sacred space. So it can be a much more sophisticated and polished form of that as well. So but in a way that we know that how this piled up form, or which has a vertical growth that marks a space which is sacred, which is divine, and that is the reason we see that all these elements are there represented in this particular temple, which is also known as the Dharmaraja temple, or the temple which is dedicated to Dharmaraja Yudhishthira. Now the other temple that we find here very interesting, that is this Bhima Ratha, and in this one we have this barrel roof. So the barrel roof is something we find, this long rectangular kind of this barrel roof, and this barrel roof also has this chaitya like opening. The chaitya, the trifoil arch that we have already studied in the Buddhist context, we have already seen that how this form got prominence in many sites, not only in Bihar and part of northern India, but also was there in the Deccan, for example in Maharashtra and so on. So similar to that form that we have studied in Karla and Vaja caves and so on. So this trifoil arch motif is here as well, and you can see that there are those bracket like forms, those are added here as well. And as I have already mentioned that they are they bear the resemblance to the earlier wooden structures which might have looked like that. So this barrel roof structure, we will also see that this structure is very important in the later architectural planning in southern India. Now, apart from that, we have another important structure, and that is this particular Ratha, which is small in shape but really relevant, and this is the Draupadi Ratha, and which has again a pyramidal roof, and on the top of that there must have been a copula. And so, if this is the another structure that we find, and this is a temple which is dedicated to the great goddess, and this form, it actually resembles a hut-like structure, and a hut-like structures we have already addressed in our discussions on Buddhism and so on, how the asceticism and monasticism, they have something to do with the hut-like structures, but this particular kind of hut-like structures are not really commonly found in the Hindu context. As I have said that, I mean, if in the Buddhist context we have seen that how the structures are made for communal use, and then those are the ones which are made as monasteries or prayer halls and so on. And as opposed to that, in the Hindu belief, we see that the structures are built from these two ideas. One is prasada, which is the royal palace, and then the other one is the womb chamber, which is the most important part of the temple, where the deity figures are kept. So, this hut-like structure we do not really find to be commonly used in the in the Hindu temples, but only we will be seeing this particular kind of structure in different pockets of the Indian subcontinent. For example, in Bengal, we find that how the terracotta temples, at least the ones we have them to be existing from 16th, 17th century and so on, they also display this hut-like form, but nowhere else we find that. Now, this particular structure, since we see that this is one space, this is one place in which there are multiple kind of architecture building that we have here. So, that is the reason this place is considered a very important site to understand the different ways in which architecture was perceived during this time, and how these different ways of architecture building had also made a deep impact on the South Indian temple constructions in the later times. So, that is also the reasons why we find that, I mean, for this Ratha structures and the other temples, this is considered as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And of course, I mean, apart from this structures, we also have freestanding the elephant and the lion figures who seem to paying their homage to the deities in the temples. So, from there is this another great panel that we find there in Mamallapuram, which makes this site absolutely stunning and very important as well. And so, this is a particular stone that we find that there was already this huge living rock structure which was there in the site, and then there was a there was a recess in this particular rock structure. Perhaps it was made by a water channel. So, the water channel is certainly was not there when this rock was selected for this cultural activity. However, this particular recessed area which appears like a river, so that was utilized by the sculptors and the artisans at this at this site, and they have they have transformed this living rock into the story of the descent of Ganges onto the earth. So, this particular recess, this area that became a symbol of the river Ganges, and river Ganges from the very early times we find that, I mean, river Ganges, even though it flows in northern India, that is considered to be one of the most sacred rivers in the Indian subcontinent, alongside river Godavari, Kaveri, Narmada and so on. So, those are the reasons why we find that the idea of the descent of Ganges, which had been discussed in the Hindu mythologies, that has been featured with all its all its grandeur and with all the possible details that can be featured here. Now, what we have here, that, I mean, how there are so many different things which are associated with it, that there are the flying the celestial figures, the figures with halo on the back of their head, that shows the divinity of them. And these flying figures, the kind of gestures they have, we have already discussed them in the context of Ellora and so on, that how they are not walking but they are flying. So, that is something that is shown in their gesture. So this kind of flying figures that we see, that all of them they flock towards the river Ganges, and that is here, and there is no other there is no personification of the river here. So for example, in the Hindu belief we also find that how river Ganges is personified as the mother goddess figure, but that she is not featured here as the mother goddess. However, we see that there is a Naga figure, there is a hooded snake and this composite figure who's flowing here. So it suggests that, I mean, this particular area is actually water, and beneath the water there is the kingdom of the Nagas and the other the creatures who do not inhabit the earth, but they sort of like, I mean, inhabit in the water, right? So that is a way in which this particular area is marked as water, and that is different from the areas around it like here and here. So apart from that, what we also see that, I mean, there are different kind of activities those are taking place. So this particular figure here, as we can see, there is a there is a man whom we find that is performing a tapasya or penance, and then he is considered here as Bhagiratha, and the Bhagiratha, someone who is who considered to be responsible for bringing the river Ganges to the earth. And here we have the mighty figure of Lord Shiva, and then there are other figures who sort of accompany him. Here we also have a structure of a temple, which gives us a sense of how the simple forms of the temples existed during that time period. And here we see this Tupika like structure on the top of it, and then of course this is a simple cell here. So these are all these different kind of expression that not only just talk about the mythologies in Hinduism, but also gives us a sense of how the sculptors and the artisans in the 7th century, 8th century Mamallapuram, they have seen the world and they have represented their contemporary activities around it. Now all these great details that we have in this panel, they are matched by these mighty elephants. So in a way this is a fantastic visual strategy, it's an ingenious visual strategy in which we find that how all those narrative details and everything, if there were more narrative details, the narrative that we have on the upper register and the left side of the screen, that might have gone lost. So to balance those narrative details, all those minute things, we see that the sculptors and the artisans, they have made a very conscious choice of depicting these mighty elephants here. This huge, the form of these elephants, they match the balance or they complement all those intricate details. And if we see the in which the elephants are carved, and not only just the elephant but all the other bodies are carved, they are carved with high naturalism. The skin is carved very smoothly, and then with all the possible details, with all the swellings of the muscles and everything else. So almost they are brought into life. Now very close to this particular panel, which is also called Gangavatarana or the descent of Ganges, here we also have another sculpture that is shown here in the right side of the screen, which is called the monkey family. And this monkey family, which is also one of my favorites, this is something where we find that there are those three monkeys. There is the mother monkey, and then there is the baby, and then there is perhaps the father monkey. And what we have here is it's a family of the monkeys that we have, and how the mother monkey is caring for the baby, and at the same time how the father monkey is perhaps just like, I mean, taking out the leeks from the mother monkey's head, something that we see to be associated with monkeys all the time, and that is also immortalized by this sculpture here. And unlike the treatment of the elephants that we see that is very smooth, here the structure of the monkey is very rough, almost like, I mean, this the furry skin of the monkeys that they have been shown here, and then, like, I mean, the minimal details and everything that also adds to the to this very animated quality of the entire family that is represented. Now, the other things that we have here in this particular site of Mamallapuram is that there is this shore temple, as I have mentioned earlier, that in the shore temple we see there is a, this is perhaps, I mean, you know, one can imagine that, I mean, how the this particular form that we have seen in the Dharmaraja Ratha, that how this horizontal registers with this the, you know, this Tupika forms on the top of them, and this high pyramidal roof, that is something here. This, all these things are been here in much more, in a more prominent form, and this Tupika on the top of it, and then on the top here we have the finial or the Kalasha. Now, another character, and this particular temple that we have, the shore temple, this has two Garbhagrihas. In one there is Lord Shiva, and the other one there is this Anantashayana Vishnu. Another feature that we find in this Pallava structures, and that will be from the city of Kanchipuram, which was the capital city of the Pallavas, and there we have some of the mighty temples. For example, the one we have in the left side of the screen, that comes from Vaikuntha Perumal temple, and that is a temple that is dedicated to Lord Vishnu. And here we have a typical Pallava lion pillar. So, the lion pillar will be very different from the kind of ones we have spoken in you know, in the context of the Ashokan pillars. And here what we have, there are seated lions, and those will form the base of the pillar, and on the top of that the shaft sort of rises, and then there is the capital. So, for example, the one we have on screen here, and this became almost a very typical representation of the Pallava pillars that we see there. Now, if we see that the other developments in temple building, and we will be coming back to the Kailashnathar temple, which we have partly addressed in the earlier module about its paintings, and if we now see the kind of the development in terms of its ground plan and its iconographic programmatic, then we see that there are certain things that suggest that how this making of the temple architecture got more and more complicated with time. So, here what we have, that, I mean, this is the main sanctorum of the Kailashnathar temple, which houses this lingam, and which you can see that, I mean, this is still this square structure, and in the center of it there is the Shiva lingam. So, which goes with the ground plan that we have studied, and then how there are more sort of like, I mean, sort of projections and more additions to this temple proper, those were not present earlier. So, between the temple here, like from the Garbhagriha, and then if this is the place we can imagine as this ceremonial hall or the mandapa, and then there will be also like Ardha Mandapa, Maha Mandapa, like the entrance porch, and then like, I mean, how it opens into the main mandapa. So, this is basically, it's a pillared hall which is covered, and there are stairways through which one can enter this place, and between the Garbhagriha and mandapa there is this narrow space which is called Antarala, and this is a place in which we find that, I mean, how the mandapa is made for ceremonial purposes, for rituals and so on. And from there, when one approaches the Garbhagriha, then they have to go through this narrow space, so that it's not really like too many people can actually go inside. So, since Garbhagriha is usually considered to be the space of seclusion where a devotee has their one-to-one conversation with the gods and goddesses, that's the reason there is this narrow space through which like not too many people can go inside it. And of course, as I have said that, I mean, by this time perhaps the devotees would be allowed only until this point, and not entirely in the Garbhagriha. Now, the other thing that we also find, that how this idea of the circumambulation that gave you know, around the temple, that, I mean, keeping the right shoulder towards the temple and circumambulating it, something that we have already seen in the Buddhist practices as well, that gave rise to having this, the wall, which sort of like, I mean, the enclosure wall around the temple. So, we see that, I mean, there is this enclosure wall which marks this sacred space, but it also sort of gives a opportunity for the devotees to circumambulate the entire space here like this. So this is how we find that how the ideas about circumambulation, paying homage and respect to the deities and so on, that also made a huge deal of impact on how the architecture is constructed. So from there, if we see some of the ways in which the iconography had also developed, and something I have already suggested, that if in the Vaishnava iconography, or the people who give prominence to the images of Vishnu, or like to people who give prominence to the figure of Vishnu, then they will consider Vishnu to be the supreme deity in the entire universe for the Hindus. And then if we see that what happens for the Shaiva worshippers, so here we see that how this iconography had shown that the Shiva being the prime deity of the universe, the supreme one, and this is a very particular figure that we find that is called Lingodbhava Murti, and in which we have the Shiva Linga from which Shiva had appeared. And then there is a story that how Vishnu and Brahma, they have tried to find the base and the top of this particular this fire, a column of fire, which also later on that became the Shiva Linga. So this entire story that praises Shiva and also explains that why Lord Brahma is not worshipped in the Hindu temples. But also what we have here, that this also shows how all these mythological stories and the narratives and everything else they have developed here. So, and then how all these stories, they also relate to they also relate to the Hindu philosophy, or at least like the Shaiva philosophy. And as I have said, that how Vaikuntha Perumal temple is also there in Kanchipuram. So if this is a temple that is dedicated to Kailashnatha, or Shiva, Lord Shiva, and then the other temple Vaikuntha Perumal, and that is dedicated to Lord Vishnu. So both this belief systems, we see them being like side by side in the same city. And of course, not to mention that Kanchipuram is also known for Kamakshi Amman temple, that is also a manifestation of the great goddess. Now here in this particular sculptural, in this exterior wall of this temple, that we see that these lion figures that we have already seen, those the seated lion figures, they appear here in a much more dynamic fashion, that this is not just seated lion figures, but they are jumping. So that is something that shows that it's not only just the iconography and the temple architecture that was being experimented with, but also like how certain how certain forms or how certain motifs which were already been established, and how the artisans and the sculptors during this time period, they have also played with these forms further to make them much more dynamic, to add to the the theatrical impact of this exterior walls of the temples. And this particular kind of this crouching, this lion figures or this jumping lion figures that we find them, they will be more sort of stylized, and they will be more emphasized in the sculptures and the pillars in the later times during the Chola period, and also in the Vijayanagara and Nayaka period in southern India. Thank you.